Hi, in this video we are going to discuss terminating contracts and offers. Let's talk about terminating contracts. All right, one of the things that's a common misconception is that a contract can be unterminated. All right, if a buyer cancels during the option period and a few days later wants to get back in the deal, no, you cannot do it. You have to start over new. And if you'd like further information on that, go to the Allegiance title video that is linked right here on the end. Okay, what forms do you use to terminate a contract? You have to remember that listing agreements and buyer rep agreements are also contracts. They just happen to be between a buyer and an agent or a seller and an agent. So you have a number of forms here. You got a termination of a listing agreement, a termination of buyer rep agreement, buyer's termination of contract, seller's termination of contract, and release of earnest money. So let's look at all these forms. The first one, all right, is a termination of listing. So in the termination of listing, you have both the agent and the seller will sign, all right, so that they mutually agree on terminating the listing agreement, all right? But the most important thing that an agent has to remember is that if you have any kind of fees or any holdover that you might have had in the listing agreement, or even if you don't have it in the listing agreement, but you want to have it now, it has to be put in paragraph D of this termination. So paragraph D says, you owe me some kind of a fee for services rendered or some commission on payment, or I'm going to identify people that I want to hold over should you sell the property. Okay. Just because you had some compensation in the listing agreement, it doesn't carry over unless you put it in the termination. And the next slide will tell why. Okay, in that form, the termination of listing, paragraph E talks about a release. And paragraph E voids any previous agreements. Okay, so just like a release of earnest money, this paragraph releases both parties to any further obligations. So let's backtrack a second. So without filling in something in paragraph D of this form, you are not entitled to any compensation or holdovers that were stated in the listing agreement. We just had a situation like that in the office where an agent from another office said, well, the seller owes me $2,500, and it was in the listing agreement. However, it wasn't in the termination agreement, and that wiped the slate clean. So that poor agent, unfortunately, was out $2,500 because she neglected to put it in the termination. So there's a good lesson there. Okay, the other one is a termination of buyer rep agreement. The agent and the seller both signed. Paragraph C, same situation as before. There's a termination fee. Most important, if the agent has fees or other things to recover, you've staged, you spent money for staging, you've done some other things, and you would have monies that were owed to you that were identified, maybe in the buyer rep agreement, maybe not. But here's the termination. Now you have a shot at recouping that. So just because you had some compensation in the buyer rep agreement, it doesn't carry over unless you put it in the termination. So this is similar to what we discussed with the termination of listing. Again, paragraph D releases both parties from all obligations except those stated in paragraph C. Okay, this one is notice of buyer's termination of contract. There's 8 different reasons why a buyer may cancel a contract. Understand each one. We're not going to go over each one individually here. Some of them speak for themselves, but understand those particular outs that a buyer would have under the contract. Now, title companies will normally only return earnest money if box 1 is checked and you're still in the option period. All those others they consider up for debate, and unless both parties agree in a release of earnest money, they're not going to do anything regarding that earnest money. Okay? Now, number 8 might be used for some circumstances outside the contract. Let's say if a buyer or seller died prior to closing. Well, that would obviously be a valid reason for terminating the contract. Okay. Notice of seller's termination of contract. We just talked about the buyer's termination of contract. The seller has very few options about terminating. Now, the form is simply two items. Number one is the obvious one of not the buyer not delivering earnest money. So seller can elect to cancel the contract in because remember earnest money was changed recently to say time is of the essence, meaning there's a strict deadline. If the buyer doesn't meet that deadline in terms of producing the earnest money, the seller has a right to cancel. And this is the form that you'd use. Box 2, all right, says identify the paragraph number of the contract or the addendum. Could be used if the buyer failed to close or other default by buyer. So where in the contract the buyer was supposed to do something, failed to do so, then you would check box 2 and fill in on the line what the rationale was for terminating. Right? Disbursement of earnest money still has to be agreed to by buyer and seller. Okay, so you can terminate the contract, but earnest money and is still up for debate. Okay, let's talk about offers. Right? We talked about contracts, but offers are important to know the time frames and the deadlines. All right. Number one, and I see this every now and then, never return a signed contract with changes and think it is not a contract until buyer or seller initials these changes. It's a valid contract and changes do not apply if not initialed then returned. Now, typically what happens, the buyer submits an offer, all right, and the seller receives the offer. It looks good to him, so he signs it and he scratches a few things out and changes them, like maybe the amount that is going to be put towards buyer's closing costs, or maybe the amount that is for a home warranty, and then he sends it back. Well, guess what? Right? The original contract is in place. Those changes are not valid, but the contract is. So once a contract is signed by both parties, use only an amendment for changes. In the case that I just described, the seller would have been wise to go back and say, I would consider your offer if you were to change such and such or whatever item that they submitted. Terminating offers. Again, we're talking about rejecting offers by the seller. Now, the seller receives an offer from a buyer. Okay, the seller shouldn't just let it sit there. Okay, it should obviously be presented to the seller by the agent. All right, and they make a decision. All right, that decision is number one, seller does not accept the above referenced offer you submitted. All right, and you're invited to submit another offer, which seller may more favorably consider if, and you could put something in there, if remove amount for seller's closing costs, or increase the price. So you could identify one or more things in there that the seller would like to see to treat the offer more favorably. Now, it is a good practice to respond in writing, all right, via email or using seller's invitation to buyer to submit new offer, all right. This avoids offers floating around, which could unexpectedly turn into contracts if ignored by the buyer. Okay. Item number 3 specifically states that this communication and invitation is not a counteroffer. Property remains on the market, and the seller may consider other offers and accept another offer. So it's merely information. He's telling you one of two things. A, I reject the offer you submitted, or B, you're invited to submit another offer if, fill in the blanks. Okay, this slide, which is a notice of withdrawal offer, accomplishes similar that we spoke about in the previous slide, but this one is pretty black and white. It removes any particular offers that are floating around. Where before we saw the buyer, the seller rejects them, now they're saying there is no offer. It's off the table. Now, either the buyer or the seller can send this notice, all right? And he can indicate as a confirmation that I've already notified you with the date and the time and who I notified that we've pulled all offers or counter offers off the table. All right. So timing is critical when there are offers or counter offers floating around waiting for the other party to execute. You would want that notification to be prior to them obviously sending something back that had been signed, because you could say, no, I'm sorry, we've already canceled that offer. So remember, timing is very crucial to this. So the form withdraws a prior offer or counter offer by either parties so that they may move on to something else and not wind up with a signed contract that they don't want later on. So box A indicates that the party filling this out has informed the other party orally at such a date and time that all offers are withdrawn. Okay. Box B would be used to withdraw an offer or counter offer that has not been done verbally as yet. All right. So if you haven't already informed them, you would use box B and indicate that you're withdrawing all prior offers and counter offers, and you would want to get that in their hands prior to them sending back an offer that has already been signed by them and is now a contract. So again, as you see, in both cases, timing is crucial.